Good morning. It's me, Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. It's been a while since I went live. I didn't think to check how long it's been, but I know it's been at least a few weeks before I went live or since I went live. It's been very, very busy around here, and I've been missing you guys. So I thought since I have lots of baking to do today, it's a nice, lovely Sunday. I figured I would get on and do all of my baking with you so that you can follow along. If you are new to the page and you haven't seen one of these lives before, I do them all the time. Please ask your questions, post them in the comments as we go. If you've seen them before and you always watch whenever I go on, I'm really glad that you're here. So we'll just get started. So today I'm going to mix the easy beginner sourdough recipe and talk about what the essential processes are and what I'm going to go through today to get that bread ready. And then I'm going to mix up my savory pizza dough, which is really tasty, so that you can see how mixing that up goes. And later today, I'm going to make that pizza dough into a deep dish pizza. So I've been practicing that. And then I'm going to talk about starter maintenance and, other various ways that you can manage your starter. So I'll be here for a while as we're mixing along. If you've got any questions, ask them. I can see them popping up on the screen. I can see that some of you guys are getting in here. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. And we'll just work through it as we can. So first of all, the beginner bread recipe, as well as the level 2 hydration recipe, are both easily found on my YouTube channel. If you're not already subscribed, just go on YouTube and type at Sourdough for Beginners. You'll find the channel, and there's playlists in the channel. So we have a starter playlist, we have a discard recipe playlist, we have a playlist where we try to get all of the lives that we do uploaded, although sometimes there's a little bit of a lag there, and we have a baking playlist. In the baking playlist right at the top, you're going to find our beginner bread recipe, which is a low hydration recipe specifically designed to make it easy for beginners to get used to making sourdough. And then once you're comfortable with the processes of sourdough and how things need to work and you're getting decent loaves, then we've got the level 2 hydration recipe. So there's a couple different versions of that in the baking playlist. Down towards the bottom of the playlist is the most recent one that I've done. It's called Artisan Sourdough Beginner Bread. It's got just slightly higher hydration, a little bit more starter, and makes it so that you can start getting that airier crumb and that crispier crust that comes from a higher hydration dough. Higher hydration dough gives you, a little bit nicer maybe of a bread, but it's trickier to work with. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to mix a single loaf of the higher hydration, but as I go, I'm going to tell you what the variations are between the beginner and the artisan. So right off the bat, I've got the container that I'm going to use as my bulk proofing container. I'm going to mix my dough directly in this container today. And then once I'm done mixing it, I'll do my stretch and folds in it, and then I'm going to let it bulk proof in this container. It's clear, it's straight-sided. Once all of my stretching and folding is done, I'm going to use a marker to mark the height of my dough, and then I'm going to be able to see what my dough is doing as it's bulk proofing. My eyes are going to be able to tell me when this dough is done bulk proofing rather than relying on time. So I've got a nice active bubbly starter. I keep 2 of them going at all times. The reason for that is that I am a firm believer in a tightly sealed lid to prevent mold and fruit flies. And so as long as you've got enough room in your starter jar for the amount of starter that you keep to at least triple, you don't have to worry about the lid popping. You don't have to worry about overflow. So in general, for me, the most starter that I'll use in a day would be 400 grams, which is a 2 times our double batch, right? So I keep these 2 starter jars going and I use them fairly often. So today I'm going to do a single loaf rather than a double loaf. So the beginner bread recipe is actually a double loaf. So we'll split it in half. If you're doing the beginner bread recipe, you would use 60 grams of starter. But because I'm doing the level 2 hydration, I'm going to use 100 grams of starter. So I'm just going to take this nice bubbly starter and I'm going to dump it right into my bowl. And I've got my bowl sitting on my scale, which is tarred to 0 grams. So it cancels out the weight of the bowl. I also, every time I do these lives, people always end up asking me, where'd you get that? So I put some links to some of the most common tools that I use into the description of this video. So if you're watching it now or if you're watching it later, the description of this video has links to the YouTube channel. It's got links to the discard recipe book that has the pizza dough that I'm going to mix shortly. And it's got links to this Amazon scale that I use that has never failed me, that I love. The starter jars that I use, and some of the other tools that I'll talk about as we go through discussing what the essential processes are after this dough is mixed up. So I've got 100 grams of starter in here. Next, I'm going to add my water. If you were doing the beginner bread recipe, you would use 340 grams of water. But because I'm doing the level 2 recipe, I'm going to use 350. It's not a huge difference in water, but 10 grams of water can make a big difference, especially depending on the type of flour that you're using. Kathy says, I can't believe I actually am catching a live. That's right. You come in all the time and say, I missed it. You know, I try as much as I can to get on both on Saturdays and Sundays and through the week. It's actually been a while since I've been live at all, so I'm really happy to be here. And for those of you who are watching, I hope you stay and follow along and ask questions as we go. So I'm just pouring 350 grams of room temperature tap water into my bowl where my starter already is. I always say if you drink the water, it's fine in your starter, right? So if you drink your tap water, then go ahead and use it in your dough. Sorry, not your starter. Well, in your starter, in your dough, whatever it may be. You don't have to use any special kind of water. My water's well water. It's got all kinds of natural minerals and good stuff in it, so I like using it. Erin says, I need this. Really great. Hi, Erin. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here. Erin is my sister-in-law. Lexi showed me the cup that you gave her yesterday, Erin, and she's so excited. She loves it so much. She better have said thank you. Melissa says, thank you so much for doing this. I'm on day 4 of my starter, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Laugh out loud. Melissa, go on YouTube, find the starter playlist, watch those. I think there's 3 or 4 videos there. It'll answer a lot of the questions that are really common when it comes to starters. So I've taken my starter, my 100 grams of starter, dissolved it into my 350 grams of water. If you were doing the beginner bread recipe, you would have had 60 grams of starter and 340 grams of water. Now I'm going to add 500 grams of flour. I'm going to use a little bit of spelt, which gives us a really nice flavor, and then I'm going to top it off with regular all-purpose flour. Melissa says, I will for sure. Thank you. Good job. Okay, so I'm just going to dump about, 75 or 100 grams of the spelt in here. We always say that when you're a beginner, if you can, start with all-purpose flour. Number one, it's probably the most forgiving flour to work with. Sturdier flours like whole wheat, spelt, rye, the freshly milled flours, they tend to suck up the water a lot faster, and they tend to bulk proof a lot faster, a lot more unpredictably. And so we usually say that if you're a beginner, don't go much over 20% of your sturdier flour, or just use regular all-purpose. And you know what? If you make a few mistakes, the first few loaves that you make as a beginner, it's a lot cheaper to, waste in an expensive all-purpose flour than it is to waste a very expensive sturdy flour. For example, I bought some rye, flour a couple weeks ago so that I could make a pumpernickel loaf, and I did the math, and the rye flour costs 10 times as much as this cheap Walmart all-purpose flour. It's more, can I ask what type of flavor? Is it more earthy? The spelt is just nice. It's just, I don't know how to explain it, but every time I make the loaves with the spelt, my family notices. They're like, this one tastes good. It's like almost a little bit of a whole wheat flavor, but it's very, mild, I think is the right word. Maybe a little more earthy. I don't know if I would use the word earthy, but I would say that I don't know, it just gives the bread a little bit of depth of flavor. But I will say that my family tends to prefer the all white loaves. Cindy says, "Yay, love, love, love." Hi, that's my mom-in-law. Love you too, Nana. Okay, so we now have 500 grams of flour in here. I did about 80 grams of the spelt and then topped it off with the all-purpose. I'm just going to add 10 grams of salt now, so I'm just going to tare my scale back to 0, so that it ignores everything that's on here. And I'm just going to get about 10 grams of salt into this mix. And then today I'm going to use gloves to mix this up because I have a really bad cut on my finger. Yesterday, I went to put a tray away in the cupboard and smashed my finger on the way in. It's really bad, and I don't want to get blood in my bread because my sweet Nana, who's watching right now, would be very disgusted if she thought that I had done that to her. So let's see what we had. It says Jim's here. Hi. Yeah, Cindy says, yeah, she loves the spelt. So the way I work is I generally throw whatever I have. I always say, use what you have. So my biggest thing is I'm here for the beginner. You know what I mean? I'm for all these people who are just sort of discovering sourdough. They don't know anything about it. They're intrigued. They want to learn. And then they get out there and they realize that there's a million different ways to do this. There's 10,000 different opinions. It seems like you might need all kinds of special tools. And what I always say is you don't need any special tools. You don't need any special flours. You can just start. And, you know, over time, if it turns out that you love making sourdough and you're going to make it forever, then there's all kinds of opportunity to experiment with really great flours and you know, more expensive flours and to accumulate and acquire these tools. But at first, just use what you've got. So when it comes to the bread that we're eating in the house, I'm always just using whatever I happen to have in the cupboard. You know what I mean? I had rye flour in the cupboard for a while there, and so I was just throwing that in with my loaves. Sometimes I run out of all-purpose flour altogether, and then I'll just sort of make a combo of all the stuff that's in the cupboard and make it happen. So use what you've got. Now, if you're not totally new to making sourdough, and if you've been following along for a little while, and you know you want to start making those advancements, we've put those sort of teachings in place for you too. So like I said, in the description of this video, there's a link to the YouTube channel, and there's also links to the basic tools that I use. I've hunted down like the most inexpensive ones. So the blue oval Dutch ovens that you see in all my videos, I've linked those. I've linked my scale. I've linked these super high temp gloves that I use all the time. I think they're actually on sale for $13.99 right now. And the silicone bannetons that I use to cold proof my dough are in there too. I noticed they were actually on like a flash sale. I don't know how long flash sales last, but they are on sale too. So if you are enjoying sourdough and you're ready to start accumulating those tools, we've got you covered there too. If you've made a bunch of the beginner loaf, had success with that, and then you made the level 2 hydration, you're having success with that, and you want to go to all 100% whole wheat, we've got that in the beginner playlist too. Cassie says, why a glove? Cassie, I cut my finger really bad yesterday. I had like a big gaping cut on my finger. I'll show it to you in just a minute. So I just don't want to, and it keeps breaking and bleeding. So I just don't want to bleed in my dough, and I really like to mix up the dough. Jason says, I love the whole wheat. Yeah, so whole wheat loaves are tougher to make. They're also way more expensive, right? The flour is really expensive. Whole wheat tends to soak up more water, so you need to increase your water content. And whole wheat tends to proof much faster. Yeah, Cassie says, God, that sucks. I've done that. Yeah, it was really bad. I had a big casserole tray, and I went to put it in the cupboard, and on the way in, it took out my finger. Okay, so I've got this mixed up to a sticky, shaggy dough. So I'm just going to quickly review the essential processes. So if you're new to new to my channel and or new to watching me and you haven't heard about the essential processes, what they are is the basic bare bones stuff that I think you should learn and do in order to consistently make sourdough really well all the time. There's a million sourdough things out there that you can do, and all of them are pretty valid. But I think as a beginner, a really great thing is just to pick a way of doing things, practice it over and over until you're feeling comfortable with it, and then adjust from there. So the basic essential processes are this: have an active starter, take your active starter, dissolve it in water, add your flour and salt, mix them up to a shaggy dough. So we've gotten to that point. Then we're going to let our dough sit for 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, we're going to stretch and fold it. We're going to repeat that 30-minute rest and the stretch and fold 3 more times for a total of 4 times. Stretching and folding is building strength in the dough, getting those gluten structures to get all tangled up with each other. By the time we're done our stretching and folding, this very shaggy, messy dough will be smooth and elastic. So on the first stretch and fold, when you go to do it, which I'll probably get to the first stretch and fold on video today, Kathy says, hey, from Virginia. Hi, we're up in Canada. Those stretches and folds, there's all kinds of ways to know when you've built enough strength. It might only take 3 stretch and folds. It might take 5. You might want to do coil folds. All of those things are valid. But when you're a beginner, just do it 4 times and then you can be fairly confident that you've built enough strength. After that, we're going to bulk proof our dough on the counter, not in the fridge. What we're looking for is for the dough to grow. So these clear, straight-sided containers actually let us see what our dough is going to do. And we want them to be fairly snug to the dough. We want the dough to really fill all the way around the container. So you're looking for a container that's about 6 to 8 cups in size. So this is like a standard, just like inexpensive Rubbermaid container, but something like, for example, this would also work fine. You know what I mean? As long as it's clear and it's got a straight side and you've got a lid for it, that's what you want for bulk proofing. When we're ready to bulk proof, we're going to push our dough down into the container. We're going to mark its height with the marker, and we're going to watch for it to either get to 75% growth if we are going to cold proof, or let it fully double to 100% if we're going to bake the same day, right? Now remember, there's a million different ways that you can do this. Aw, thanks, Cindy. She sent me stars. Yay, those are so fun. We are going to acknowledge that there's a million different ways that you can do this, right? The essential processes are designed for beginners to just have a set of steps and a set of basic timing that they understand, that they can follow until they get comfortable. And then once they're comfortable, you can add in things like auto leasing, or maybe putting your dough into the oven with the light on to speed it up, or using a dough proofer, or using the bread proof setting on your oven. Oh, Tracy sent stars. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Yay. I use those to buy all kinds of sourdough stuff. That's so fun. Then, you know, you can do this a million different ways. That's important, right? But these are, just follow these, get comfortable, then start adding in auto leasing, or adding in creating a levain from your starter, or changing the way you're bulk proofing, or, you know what I mean, going for long cold proofs or short cold proofs. After our bulk proofing, we're going to do one of two. First, we're going to pre-shape our dough, which is when we take the very sticky dough, we dump it out of the container onto the counter. No flour, no water. We use a bench scraper or some sort of tool that's got sort of a straight, dull side. I actually have a bench scraper, so I got one. But when I was first starting out in sourdough, I didn't have a bench scraper, and so I used this very dull knife work. We're just going to work our way around the dough and sort of work it underneath itself and into a ball so that it looks like a traditional dough ball. We're going to let it sit for 15 to 30 minutes, and then after that, we're going to do the final shape on our dough. So that's where we flip the dough over, stretch it out into a rectangle, pamphlet fold it. So fold the top third down, the bottom third up, turn it sideways, roll it, get it nicely shaped, right? And then at that point, we're either going to do our functional score and bake right away, or we're going to drop it into our bannetons and let it cold proof for anywhere from 4 to 36 hours. Some people even push it farther. What we are looking for at baking time is a functional score. So decorative scores are great, and if your dough is proofed properly, they will work great. If your dough is not proofed properly, they're not necessarily going to hold. But what a functional score is a score that goes from one end to the other of the bread or from one side to the other of the bread. It's half an inch deep, and it's designed to encourage oven spring. So when our dough goes in the oven, it's, sort of this tall, right? It's all sort of sitting on top of each other as the heat Every time I try to show my oven spring demonstration with my hands like this, I make hearts. I think that's the funniest thing. I'm not doing it on purpose. I didn't mean to, but hey, it's like, yeah. So let's see what happens here. What is this? Hang on a second. I'm just getting, let's see here. That's funny that happens. Okay, so neat. I don't know what this is, but let's see. Okay, sorry, my thing was doing something funny. Okay, so we've got our bread. It's this tall in the oven, and we want it to spring. That one functional deep score is going to let that steam escape from the bread. And when the steam escapes through that score, that's what creates the belly on our bread. So I'll show you what the belly is. So this is kind of an old loaf. It's a little bit stale, but this is our belly. So with this loaf, I cut one functional score down the middle, and when it sprung, it went pop and came out of that spot where you cut. So when you see those very beautiful scores that are there, it's when you see the very beautiful scores that are out there, those are certainly fun. They're purely aesthetic. And the way to know that you've perfected your bread making is it's funny. This thing is telling me thing is saying activate a stars party. I don't know what that means, but who knows? Okay. Then we're going to bake. Ovens vary. Everyone always says, how long should I bake for, right? Ovens vary drastically. I know this personally. I started out with, the little apartment-sized oven that couldn't. No matter what I did, the thing would not hold temperature. It was just so difficult to work with. And so I was constantly having to experiment to get this oven to work. I now have this amazing new oven. Oh, by the way, check this out. I got this for on top of my oven because when I first got the oven, people were telling me that I should be careful with putting my Dutch oven down on top of the oven. So when I'm pulling my Dutch oven out and putting it on top of the oven, I had to be careful of breaking the glass on my oven. So I got that thing. It's amazing. If you don't have one of those, you should get one. They're inexpensive on Amazon. I linked it. Okay. What I suggest for your first bake is to do 450 degrees Fahrenheit the whole time. If you're using a Dutch oven, take the lid off after 30 minutes. And then from there, around 10 or 15 minutes after, start using a meat thermometer, just your basic meat thermometer like this, to check the temperature. And you always want your bread to be cooked to about 205 Fahrenheit. All the way up to 210 is fine, but you might be pushing it a little bit there. So this dough, I'm going to stretch and fold in about 20 minutes or so. We've been talking for, I don't know how long, but I'll do the first stretch and fold on this one and talk about building strength. And then I'm thinking that later today, after this is done bulk proofing, I'm hoping I can come back and show you the pre-shaping and shaping phase. And I am going to bulk proof this one because I still have a little bit of bread left over, and we're having deep dish pizza for supper, so we're not necessarily going to need some bread. I'm going to mix up pizza dough. So linked in this live is our ultimate discard recipe book. So it's got our pizza dough recipe in it. It's got, piles of discard recipes. The pizza dough recipe is also in the discard playlist on YouTube, so you can sort of follow through on this. I am going to do a half of this because it's just my husband and I home today, and my freezer's full. We just did our grocery shopping, so I don't want to freeze this dough. So I've taken the ingredients for the pizza dough and I've just made notes on them and split them in half. So we're just going to do that. I'm also going to use a little bit of yeast today to speed this up. So let's talk about discard, right? You're going to hear, discard recipes and what is discard, and they're all out there, right? when it comes to discard recipes, there's a couple things to keep in mind. You can use active starter in place of discard. That's totally fine, right? So if you're trying to make discard pancakes, for example, and you don't have any discard in the fridge, you can just pull your active starter out and use that, right? If the recipe is a discard recipe that needs to rise, then you're probably going to either A, need to use discard plus yeast, or you're going to need to use active starter. So there's several recipes that are in my books. The pizza dough recipe, the dinner rolls recipe, we've got the chocolate sourdough bread, let's see, there's not that one. Yeah, no, let's see, there's the cinnamon rolls, sandwich bread, anything that bagels, for example. What else do we have in here? Oh, I think we have scones, hot dog buns. What else is in here? Focaccia, and breadsticks. So all of those recipes need to rise, right? Just like any other bread, they have to rise. So you're either going to have to use active starter or discard plus yeast, right? So those are sort of the have-tos. Then there's also the option of, hey, I'm in a hurry. I don't feel like waiting for the slow rise of a sourdough, but I still want that sourdough flavor. So I'm going to use active yeast to speed things up. So that's what I'm going to do with the pizza dough today. Is I'm going to make it sourdough pizza dough so that we've got this nice sourdough in here, right, for the health benefits, for the flavor, but I'm going to speed it up with some yeast today. So I'm just going to quickly show you how we do that. So this is half of my pizza dough recipe, okay? So first of all, we are going to start with 60 grams of starter. So I'm just going to tare my scale to 0, and I'm going to put 60 grams of starter into this bowl. So if you were doing a full batch of the recipe, you'd be using 120 grams of starter. And once we're done mixing this and we've done a stretch and fold on the dough that we just mixed up, I'll do a little bit of a chat about starter maintenance and the various ways that you can manage your starter depending on how you bake, how often you bake, how old your starter is. So lots of different ways to manage these. Next, I'm going to add 175 grams of water. So it's usually 350, but I've cut it in half. So I'm just going to tare my scale back to 0 to ignore the bowl and the starter that's in there, and get 175 grams of flour in there. So bear with me for just a minute here. Get up to 175. Now, the way I like to do it, ooh, that was a little high, 185. I went about 10 grams over, so I'm just going to take a little out here, only because I don't ever want my pizza dough to be too watery. Okay, I like to put all of the moist ingredients in together. So the recipe calls for 50 grams of olive oil, so I'm going to do 25 grams of olive oil. So just tare my scale back to 0, and I'm just going to add this olive oil into my pizza dough. So 25 grams. A nice olive oil is what gives you that nice silky dough that you need for pizza, right? That stretchiness that you need. It's also what softens up the sourdough to make it, because, you know, when we work with sourdough, it's quite a stiff dough. With the pizza dough, we want it to be a little more soft and elastic for pizza. And then at this point, I'm going to just add a little bit of yeast to this. You would usually, if you were going to do a full batch, use about a full tablespoon. I'm splitting this in half, so I'm going to use like a teaspoon and a half. We're just going to add that in. And all that's going to do for me today is it's going to take over as the rising agent. It's going to make this dough rise super fast rather than that slow sourdough rise. And that's only because I'm just only getting this prepared now. It's already 10 in the morning. And Hubs and I are going to watch dirt bike racing today. Maybe sit together on the couch and have a little nap and everything else. So we want to eat this pizza when we're ready, probably around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I'm thinking about making it on the barbecue, but I'm not sure. I might bake it in the oven, because a deep dish pizza needs to really be well cooked, otherwise it falls apart. I don't know. Have you ever seen a deep dish pizza? If you've got any questions as we go, you can definitely comment or whatever it may be. We've done so much stuff on the barbecue. I'm on the fence. We'll see what my husband wants to do. So here we go. We've got the starter, the olive oil, the water, and the yeast all sort of mixed up together in here. Now, with my pizza dough, I like to add a little bit of garlic powder and a little bit of basil for flavor. So these are like my secret ingredients. These are what make it taste so delicious. I like to add it now into the water so that it disperses really nicely when we add in the flour. So I'm just going to put, a little bit of basil in there, and I'm going to put, in my house, I always say there's no such thing as too much garlic, but obviously that's personal preference. I like to put lots of garlic in there. So I'm just going to add those in. People do pizza dough lots of different ways. You could add a little bit of sugar. There's all kinds of stuff that you can put in there. For me, we like ours to be quite savory. So we go with the garlic and the basil. And then even when we make the pizza, I dissolve a little bit of garlic powder or some fresh, minced garlic into some olive oil and brush the crust with that when we're making a regular pizza. Okay, so we've got our water, our olive oil, our starter, our parsley, and our garlic powder. So now it's time to add our our flour and our salt. You can use 00 pizza dough here. Let me just take a sip of this, try and clear my throat here. If you've got 00 pizza dough on hand, use it. It's really good for pizza. It gives you that nice elasticity that you want for pizza. But if you don't have it on hand, then just like I always say, regular all-purpose flour is called all-purpose for a reason. It's meant for everything. Here we go. By the way, this smells so good with the garlic and the basil and the nice sourdough in there and that little bit of yeast, that nice yeasty smell, and the olive oil. Oh, it smells delicious. Okay, so the regular recipe calls for 625 grams. I'm going to go with about 312 grams of flour, so I'm just going to tare this scale back to 0 and start pouring this flour in here. Here we go. Excuse me. Luckily, it's just Rick and I here with this little frog that I seem to have in my throat today. Here we go. All right. So, flour, and then as always, we're going to have a little bit of salt. I'm going to tare my scale back to 0 and get about 5 grams of salt in here because this is just a half recipe. And then just like always, I would normally just mix this with my hand, but because of this horrifying cut that I have on my finger, I'm going to wear this glove. Cindy says, I think I'm having bad reception. You keep freezing on me. Kathy says, it's probably, I don't know, am I freezing for anybody else? Tell me in the comments if I am. Kathy says, what exactly is 00 flour? I've seen it around. So 00 flour is just a plain white flour. I think it might be all-purpose. It's the same as bread or all-purpose flour, but it's very fine. It's ground finer, and it's ground much finer than all-purpose flour. And it's Jason. Are you still on? I'm not sure if you're here. Jason Hopper is my brother-in-law, and he's the one who actually introduced me to 00 flour. It is an Italian flour, and in most grocery stores, you can actually find the From Italy versions of it. And some of the From Italy versions of it are also not enriched, which is an interesting topic to discuss. Anyhow, it's very finely ground, and it's very heavily sifted, so it's just super smooth, right? Now, I've tried using it in cookies before, and I found that they ended up very dense, right? So it's definitely not for everything. But my understanding is that 00 flour was designed specifically for pizza dough. So Kathy says not freezing. Must be my reception. Yeah, it must be you, Nana. Welcome to Canada. So I don't know how many of you are watching are from Canada, but our service is just terrible here compared to other places. Okay, so with the pizza dough, it's a much less sticky dough than your standard sourdough. I didn't mean to drop like that. So I'm actually going to knead this pizza dough a little. So I'll show you what I do. I just take my dough and I get it out on the counter here. Let's just tilt this a little bit. There we go. And then what I do is I take this last sort of bit of dry stuff that hasn't sort of absorbed into the pizza dough, like this and like this. By the way, these gloves, like, it actually kind of makes it so that you have way less mess to clean up. I mean, it might be a little bit wasteful to use gloves all the time. I actually have them. My husband does all kinds of meat smoking and all that sort of thing. So we're just going to knead our pizza dough, okay? So all we're going to do is just sort of work it. We're going to build all of its strength now, especially since this pizza dough has yeast in it. It's going to rise within an hour or two. So we're just going to do like the traditional bread knead with this pizza dough. Whereas with a regular sourdough loaf, you do the stretching and folding, right? Stretching and folding is essentially the same purpose as kneading, to build strength in the dough. But with our pizza dough, we're going to do it this way. If it starts to get too sticky on the counter, you can add a little bit of flour, but resist the urge to add too much. Cindy says it's great for gravy. Oh, Linda says, what should the bread weigh and how to know how to price it for sale? And Kathy says, thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so Linda, that's actually a great question. So the recipes that we have, the loaves work out to be about 900 grams, 950 grams. That tends to be a full size loaf, right? So that's going to fill, I'll show you here. So this is my Dutch oven. It's 4.3 or 4.5 quarts. There's a link to it in the description of this video. My bread touches on almost all sides when I put it into the Dutch oven. And then, when it expands in the oven, when I take it out, the loaves end up being, about this big. So 950 grams before they're baked. If your dough is springing properly in the oven, and you're getting that high oven spring, by the time they're cooked, you'll have lost somewhere between 75 and 90 grams of weight in your dough, because a bunch of that moisture that you've made has sprung out of the bread. So that means that your cooked loaf might be somewhere between 850, 875, 900 grams, right? Depending on how much you lost. So what we're finding is that regardless of where you are, $10 seems to be the amount. So I occasionally will bake a whole bunch of loaves for the purpose of making a video, or for whatever it may be, and then I'll sell one or two of those loaves here on the little island that I live on. A bunch of my neighbors like to take the bread off my hands when I don't need all that I've baked, and I get $10 Canadian per loaf. I've seen, at farmers markets, but also in the big group and in our sourdough marketplace group that we've got, it's a topic of conversation that comes up. And it seems to me that even if you're in US dollar, even some of our UK people, it tends to be about $10, right? 10 US, 10 Canadian. I know that the euro is quite a bit different, and the pound and everything else, but that seems to be the general rule for a regular sourdough loaf. And then it appears to me that in most cases, when you add inclusions, it's like another $1.50 or $2 added to it. So like we often see like, oh, the jalapeno cheddar loaf is $12. You know what I mean? And the everything bagel loaf is $11.50 kind of thing. So I hope that helps you with your pricing. That's a really great question. By the way, I'm just going to be standing here baking and mixing for a little while. So if you've got sourdough questions, this is definitely your opportunity to ask. So with my pizza dough, I'm just doing sort of a nice knead, and this has got yeast in it. So here's going to be the process with this. I'm going to let this rise in the bowl about 2 hours until it's really fully doubled. The yeast is going to really make that happen fast. And then after that, I'm going to punch it down and I'm going to roll it out and I'm going to bake with it. If I'm not ready to bake with it in 2 hours when it's risen, I'm just going to stick it in the fridge until I am, just to keep it from rising too much. So probably after I'm done this live today, I'm going to pop right over to the grocery store and buy some mozzarella cheese and, the ingredients that I want for my deep dish pizza. And then we're going to get this. I'm just going to knead this pizza dough. I always say, what does it say in my recipe? So what it says in my recipe in the book is if you're just going to use sourdough starter only, then you should do it as a stretch and fold process because it'll be much stickier. But if you're using yeast and you're making it more like a traditional pizza dough or traditional pizza bread, a traditional bread like sandwich bread or whatever it may be, you want to knead it 4 to 6 hours or 4 to 6 minutes, or use your dough mixer, your dough hook. So I've got this little ball, teeny tiny, but this is just enough for one little deep dish pizza for my husband and I. So I'm just going to take my my bowl, and I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of olive oil in here. That's going to sit in there with the dough, and then I'm going to get some plastic wrap, and I'm going to cover this dough and let it rise. And then soon after it's risen, because I rushed it with the yeast today, we'll be able to make pizza. So I'm going to split this dough in half and roll it out into two very thin, well, not very thin, but fairly thin pizza doughs, and then I'm going to put them into a round cake pan and make them traditional Chicago deep dish style, according to what I've seen on social media. So Cindy, for pre-baked, about 900 grams, yeah. So Kathy says, what is all of your favorite and easy inclusions? I like jalapeno and cheddar. I wind up using too much yummies, and it's dense. Okay, so Kathy, I like jalapeno cheddar too, and I like garlic and cheddar, and I put tons of garlic in. I've got a friend who loves garlic, and there's just no such thing as giving him too much garlic. So I tend to put a lot in. Now, you just have to think about your hydration, right? I often suggest that the easiest way to prevent your bread from becoming dense or affected by your inclusions is to understand that they're going to contribute to your hydration on one side or the other. So things like garlic, jalapenos, blueberries, lemon rinds, some of the most common things, chocolate chips, they are all going to, even sugar, are going to increase the hydration in your bread, right? Sugar liquefies as soon as you connect it to water. So you need to think of sugar almost as a liquid, right? On the other hand, if you're using things like garlic powder or seeds, whether it's, sesame seeds or poppy seeds or everything bagel seasoning or cinnamon, these are really common inclusions to use, right? They're going to reduce your hydration, right? So there's a couple of different things that you can do. The easiest thing that you can do is not add your inclusions until your final shape, right? So in the shorts on my YouTube channels or featured at the top of either my page or my group, my Sourdough for Beginners group, the one with 900,000 members. Up in the featured section, there's posts that I made that have like this many links to everything you could possibly ever think of kneading with sourdough. And one of them says mix-ins, and it shows how I add those inclusions at just before the final shape, like right before I bake. And the reason for this is because it's less likely to affect the hydration. Another option is that you can reduce or increase, water or flour. I think the easiest way is to reduce in order to compensate. So say, for example, you wanted to add a teaspoon of garlic powder and a teaspoon of sesame seeds and a teaspoon of poppy seeds, right? So that's 3 teaspoons. Maybe just reduce your flour by 3 teaspoons and replace it with those, right? Then you're not increasing your dry ingredients and reducing your hydration. If you're going to use, say, a tablespoon of lemon juice for a lemon blueberry loaf, maybe you want to just decrease your water by that amount, right? That's one good way to do it. I mean, we've done ones where we've entirely replaced the water in our bread with beer. And made beer bread. We've done other ones where we've done a high quantity of cocoa instead of so reduced the flour and added the cocoa. There's one where we can actually use coffee instead of water. That works well both for chocolate espresso bread and for pumpernickel bread. So it's kind of a complicated question. In my book, I actually have like a whole list of, I wonder if it's here, a whole list of inclusions, ideas. I actually scanned the group a while back, but there's the most popular are lemon poppy seed, lemon blueberry, everything bagel, cinnamon sugar, chocolate sourdough, beer sourdough. We've got, I've seen dill pickle where they use dill spice and they cut up pickles and they put some cheese in, jalapeno cheddar, garlic cheddar, Parmesan Asiago. Basically anything that you can think of, you can do as an inclusion. So Kathy says, okay, thank you. I've not adjusted. I will try. Yeah, so that's one thing. Or wait till the very, very end to add them. I'm just checking to see if my books here. So these are my two recipe books. I've written 3 books. I've got the one book that's the essential processes that I talked about earlier in this live, and then these ones are recipe ones. And the first ultimate guide has a list of inclusions as well as like a step-by-step photo tutorial that shows you like how to add inclusions and get them dispersed really well through the bread. But it's not there, so maybe we can talk about that a little more. Okay. This dough that we just mixed earlier has been sitting for more than 30 minutes, so we're going to give it a stretch and fold. So when we first mixed it, it was very shaggy. It's still very shaggy, and that's okay. Stretching and folding takes the place of kneading. So why do we stretch and fold? We stretch and fold for the same reason that we knead regular bread, right? We're building strength. We're encouraging the gluten structures to get tangled up with each other and start working together. We're getting the dough to stick to itself rather than to everything else around it. However, sourdough is very sticky, and if you tried to tip this out onto the counter and knead it, it would stick to everything. It would stick to the counter. It would stick to you, and we don't want to add flour to sourdough. We want that hydration. The hydration in the dough is what contributes to that oven spring, what gives you that nice bubbly open crumb inside of your bread once you start doing it properly. So we stretch and fold. It's a much gentler form of kneading. So I'm just going to wet my hand. I like to get mine sort of nice and wet. My knuckles shouldn't touch the dough at this point now because I'm going to be going under. So I think I should be okay without my glove. Cindy says, I love the pumpernickel bread you made, and I had no idea that it was made with cocoa. Yeah, we have a brand new pumpernickel recipe on the YouTube channel. If you go to the video section of the YouTube channel, you should just see it right there. I might have put it into the baking playlist. I'm not sure. But yeah, pumpernickel bread, what makes it so dark, the ingredients that make pumpernickel bread so dark are cocoa and molasses, believe it or not. So I'm going to show you when we first start stretching and folding how weak this bread is, right? So I'm going to reach underneath my dough and I'm going to pull it straight up and look how much it stretches and how easily it rips, right? That is a weak dough, right? A weak dough is a dough that doesn't hold on to itself, right? So when we do this first stretch and fold, it's our first step towards building strength, right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to gently lift up this dough and fold it down on top of itself. Now, even by the end of the first set of stretches and folds, the dough is actually a lot stronger than it was that first time. By the time we're done our 4th set of stretches and folds, you should be able to pick up this dough with your hand and hold it like this, and it'll stay sort of in the shape of a ball. You'll even be able to bounce it, and it'll sort of bounce. It'll eventually rip, of course. If you force it to rip, it's going to rip. But all I'm saying is that stretching and folding like this builds strength. So I like to, give it a really good stretch and fold for the first one, like this. Sort of make sure I've gotten everywhere. Just reach under the dough. And now I'm going to let this sit for another 30 minutes. And I'm going to stretch it and fold it again, and I'm going to repeat that. So after that's done, I'm going to mark the height of this dough. I'm going to let it bulk proof. I might use my bread proofing option on my oven. I've tested it a couple times now. It seems to work great. It reduces my bulk proofing time from about 4 hours down to about 2 to 2.5 hours. And then after that, I'm going to pre-shape and shape this dough and get it into a bandage and then cold proof it overnight. If my day doesn't get too busy, then I'm going to probably come back on live for getting the dough ready for cold proofing. So there we go. If anybody's got any questions, ask them. I'm getting ready to sign off. And then, of course, I'm just going to tell you, I would love it so much if you would follow the page at Sourdough for Beginners on Facebook. So we've got two things. Well, we've actually got several things on Facebook. we have the Sourdough for Beginners group. We're approaching 900,000 members. It's a forum. You can go in there, you can ask your questions, and everyone in the group is going to answer you however they feel. You might get some good advice in there. You might learn some things. It's a great place to sort of see what everyone's working on. Then we have the Sourdough for Beginners page, and that's where only I can post. So that's where we post tutorials, things that we're finding. That's where our lives originate from. So that's where you sort of get access to me. And specifically, this is what we're teaching for beginners, right? And then after that, we also have our sourdough marketplace. So if you're selling anything to do with sourdough, or if you're trying to learn about selling, if you've got awesome products, then you can go into the sourdough marketplace. If you want to, promote your channel, whatever it may be, you can do all of that in the sourdough marketplace. And then we've got, some side pages, like we've got one page just for only lives for people who want to watch the lives, etc. So there's those. And then we have YouTube, and YouTube is where all of our tutorials are. So if you really want to learn sourdough, whether it's the basic beginner stuff or the things like the pumpernickel, the 100% whole wheat, all of those things, then you're going to find those on the YouTube page. So before I sign off, I'm just going to quickly talk about starter maintenance. So if you're establishing a new starter, then all of the rules are different than if you have an active, healthy starter. So when you're establishing a new starter, it's really important to make sure that you've got enough room in your jar every day to feed your starter. So we discard out of our jar every day. We throw that discard away because it's not active yet. We refeed our starter. We repeat that process with the starter living on the counter every day until our starter activates. Once our starter activates, we might continue the daily feedings on the counter for another 2 to 3 weeks to continue to build strength in our starter, right? To get it nice and strong. Once we have a very strong active starter, there's now a few different ways we can manage things. And usually the easiest way to choose which one is best for you is based on how you bake, how often you bake, and how much you bake, right? So once your starter is activated, the ratio becomes much less important, right? When you're trying to activate a starter, you want to sort of maintain one ratio, whether it's 1 to 1 to 1 or 1 to 2 to 2. So ratios are always based off your starter amount. So 1 to 1 to 1 is if you have 50 grams of starter, you feed it 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. Once your starter is active, it becomes less important to manage the ratio. There's lots of things that you can do with your starter to affect it over time. For example, you could just feed it a couple tablespoons of flour and water just to give it a little bit of a boost, right? Or you could discard it back to all but a small amount, like 10 or 15 grams, and then give it a 50-gram each flour and water feed, right? Once it's established and active and strong, it can be messed with. So how do you maintain your starter? If you are a daily baker, then when you're done mixing up your dough, refeed your starter, leave it sitting on the counter, right? It's good to go the next day. You can use your starter at or after peak. The longer past peak that you use your starter, the more sour flavor you get. So if you're a daily baker and you really don't want any sour flavor, then after you're done mixing, you might not feed your starter right away. And then you might just feed it, either the next morning, 4 hours before you bake or before you go to bed so it's ready in the morning, but it lives on the counter. If you are a once a week baker, then when you're done your mix, don't refeed your starter, pop the lid on, stick it in the fridge, and then 4 to 12 hours before your next bake, pull it out and feed it, right? I always suggest that feeding your starter before bed and mixing early in the morning is fine. That's how I do it. As long as you're not really opposed to a super sour flavor, then that's usually fine. You can usually do that. You don't have to catch the starter exactly at peak. As long as it has peaked or at least doubled, you can use it from there all the way through the process. Even if it's already fallen, you can still use it. Just the further along the fermentation process, the more flavor you're going to get. If you're like me and you usually bake every 2 days or so, you can actually feed your starter as soon as you're done mixing, let it double on the counter, stick it in the fridge at peak, and then you can pull it out of the fridge and use it right away, right? So that's often what I do is I'll feed the starter and I'll let it sit, I'll let it get to peak, and then I'll put it in the fridge at peak. And 2 days later, it's still like way up there. Or maybe it's fallen like a slight bit, but the fridge has paused that fermentation process enough that I can actually pull it directly out of the fridge and use it straight into my dough. So lots of options. I'm not planning to bake now for at least several days. We've got a busy week coming up. The reason I haven't been going live as much is because it's been quite busy. So I'm actually not going to refeed these starters. The other thing is that these starters are set up for me to take 200 grams from them. Well, I only took 100 grams from one and 60 from the other, so they're still quite full. So what I'm going to do is just stick these in the fridge as they are, and then when I know my next bake is coming, I'm going to feed these starters according to what I need. So then that's the next thing, is how do we feed our starter, right? Well, we feed our starter according to what we need, right? What do we need? So if you are like me and you usually use 200 grams all the time, then feed your starter 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water, and that gives you 300 grams to use up, right? If you need 120 grams of starter to do the beginner bread recipe, then, discard your starter down to 60 grams. And feed it 60 grams each of starter and water, or flour and water. Or if you've got 40 grams in your jar, that's fine. Feed it 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water, then you've got 120 and it leaves 40 grams behind. Right? So once your starter is established and strong, it becomes much less of an issue to maintain sort of strict feeding regimes and everything else, right? But make sure that it's really nice and strong. If you're sort of making your own starter right from scratch, you might want to build up some strength in it over a few months before you start messing with it. There's nothing wrong with maintaining a really good routine when it comes to your sourdough, but you also can be a little bit laid back. So I think that's it for today. In regards to my live, I'm going to continue stretching and folding my sourdough for 3 more stretch and folds, and I'm going to pop to the grocery store and get some mozzarella cheese for my deep dish. I am going to film making my deep dish pizza later today, and as long as it doesn't fail entirely, I'll edit up the video and I'll put it on YouTube. So if you're interested in seeing that, make sure you're subscribing. And if you've got any questions, if you're watching this after the fact, when this isn't live anymore, ask the questions in the comments. If you aren't familiar with me yet, I always try to come back to the comments and ask any questions that there are. So to those of you who sent me stars, thank you so much. That's so awesome. And to those of you who watch and who are always here, I appreciate you so much, and happy baking. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye.